Welcome in to the Roll Tide Rewind. We are here today to do an SEC preview with friend of the program, Owen Barnes. Owen, how are you doing today?
Doing great, doing great. Happy to join you. Obviously, Alabama got a win over Kennesaw. Not pretty on the defensive side, but they did get a win earlier today. So happy to be talking basketball.
Yeah, a 50-point half from Kennesaw State after a great first half effort by the defense. Little lackluster in the second half, but a win is a win these nowadays. But Owen, before we start, how can I listen to your content again?
Yeah, you can listen to the content over. I have my YouTube channel at Barnes of Bama. I do weekly podcasts. During basketball season with football going on, I'm doing 2 or 3 episodes a week. Obviously, it's a little different here around Christmas time, but 2 to 3 episodes a week. I was also on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. But I know, do the weekly videos here on YouTube. So if you're interested in the basketball content, I definitely put out a lot of it.
Yeah, if you love Alabama basketball, be sure to tune into Barnes on Bama. But today we're going to go over an overall SEC preview and how does Alabama fit in this rotation. But so far, Owen, what have you seen from the SEC this year? Obviously, not as strong as last year. That was kind of like a hard standard to live up to. But how do you see the SEC this year? Because it looks like the Big 12 and Big 10 have shown to be, I guess, better conferences to start off with. But how do you feel how deep the SEC is this year?
I think the difference is I think that the SEC probably only has, and we'll talk about some of them. I think the SEC may have 4 to 5 contenders in like a realistic, make a Final Four type run team. But I think that um, the bottom end of the league isn't nearly what it was last season, right? The big thing that you talked about last season is the SEC. I believe what they have 5 non-conference losses going into conference players. Some like crazy number of losses. Alabama, the SEC wins the ACC Challenge 14-2. There were a lot of things that went on and led to just an absolute dominant run by the SEC. And that's to me the big difference in this season versus last season. I still think some of the teams at the top are still very good. You've obviously seen a little fall off with transfers, maybe not working at the level or in the same system that you thought they would be, like a place like Florida. Obviously having some issues with transfers, a place like Kentucky. Both schools I think are pretty good, but obviously had some issues with transfers, some issue with injury, and I think that's really been some of the difference in the SEC. But I do think that the top of the league is still good enough to compete with the top of other leagues. I just think the big difference is you're definitely not going to be a 14 bid league this year. My gut would say somewhere between 10 and 12. If you're lucky. I think that you're going to have to be finishing. You know, Anybody finishing 8 and 10 in conference this year is not going to be super thrilled about where they sit. I think that 9-9 is probably what it's going to take. I think 8 and 10 will require some definitely big non-conference wins, and I think there are a few teams that have that. We'll just have to see when conference play rolls around.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, the 14 bid league last year was crazy because I remember like going into the SEC tournament, Texas, everyone thought they were on thin ice. And then Texas, I think, wins a game or two. But then the last game they lost, everyone was convinced that's it for Texas. But the committee was like, nope, they're safely in. That's all they needed to do. And they were like the 14th best team in the SEC. And the thing is, Texas wasn't a horrible team last year. Not Trayvon Mark, who am I thinking of, that the sharpshooter they had last year? Cole's going to be mad that I don't know his name off the top of my head.
Yeah, he just went to the league.
Cole be angry that I forgot his name, but Cole claims he's the best basketball player he's ever seen in person. But I watched him in person last year. He is really, really good. I'll remember his name soon. But we'll move into the top five of the SEC, or top five of the SEC according to
Trey
metrics.
Johnson.
Trey Johnson, baller, certified baller. We'll get into right here is the rankings of the net, the Ken Palm and Evan Maya. If y'all don't follow these rankings, I recommend you do. It's to get you a good, landscape of college basketball. Evan Maya, follow him on Twitter. Ken Palm, you have the website. The net rankings are the rankings the NCAA puts out of the quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, quad 4 victories. This is how it stands as of now. The net, Ken Palm, and Evan Maya all have Vanderbilt number 1. The net loves Alabama because they schedule a lot of quad 1 games. Alabama's played, I think, 6 quad 1 games, which I think as of right now is the most in the country. Florida's also given love. Florida's also given a lot of grace too. They've scheduled hard this year. Florida, as of right now, according to Ken Palm, has the 15th toughest schedule coming into today. Alabama was first, so Alabama and Florida are given a lot of grace, even though with the 3 and 4 losses, they both have scheduled hard. Vandy before today was 115th strength of schedule according to Ken Palm, but the advanced metrics love Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt today had a really, really good game. Tyler Nickel was 8 of 10 on three. They beat Wake Forest by over 30 points. Wake Forest, funny enough, was the team that contested Michigan the most, the team that's number one by a lot of websites right now. They actually took them, I think, into overtime and lost by only 1 point, but Vandy took care of business with them. What do you think of these rankings, Owen? Like how, the advanced metrics love Vanderbilt, because today Vanderbilt went from 10th, and after that victory against Wake Forest, they're now 7th in Ken Palm, above UConn, and I think Houston too.
Yeah, so the thing with Vandy at the end of the day, there's a couple of things. One, they're taking care of business, and they're taking care of business, and I'm going to use them in comparison to a team like Georgia, right? You see Georgia, in the top 5 in both Evan Maya and in the net, but not in top 5 in Ken Palm. I believe part of that is because Ken Palm, I think, as of today, is factoring in some preseason stuff, whereas Evan Maya is not quite as much. The net, of course, is not factoring in any preseason because purely the NCAA is like this season metric. But I think the big difference when you look at those two schedules, right? And I'm just going to use the Ken Palm rankings because that's the numbers that I know the best, and I actually have it pulled up. But Vandy has currently wins over UCF, which was 45th in Ken Palm, VCU at 41, St. Mary's at 33, SMU at 42, Memphis at 73, and Wake Forest at 59, right? They've not played the top of the top like a team like Alabama or Florida or Auburn has played. So you haven't played the Purdues and the Arizonas of the world. But the teams that they have played, they've taken care of business against all of them. They have solid wins against all of those teams I mentioned, and Vanderbilt's undefeated, right? In my mind, that means Vanderbilt is going to be a very good team. We'll talk about them later. I have them as a team that I think is going to compete for the top 4 of the SEC. I think that they have been one of the best non-conference teams. I think that they're definitely a team that you should look at and should not assume that they're a bad team just because of who they beat up on. Then you look at a team like Georgia, right? And this is not to slight Georgia in any way, but their schedule currently, the only 4 teams they have faced inside of the top 200 were Florida State. They did have a solid win over Florida State. Cincinnati, they had a solid win over Cincinnati. Xavier at 102, which was a 1-point win. And Clemson, their one loss of the season, which was in overtime. Clemson ranked 34th in Ken Palm, right? So the only win they have in Ken Palm in the top 100 is a win over Cincinnati at 75. And then their second best win is over Xavier by a single point, and that's Ken Palm's number 102. And the reason I bring up these numbers, and for people that maybe don't pay attention to it as much as guys like me or you, the numbers may be really confusing to you. To put this into perspective, the South Florida team that Alabama beat just this past week by a score by 11 points, that that was honestly could have been a bigger score than that. Alabama had some shooting woes at times in that game. South Florida did some good things, cut it toward the end of the game. Alabama wins by 11. That South Florida team would be the best win that Georgia has all season. Right. So that's what I want you to put into perspective. Alabama wouldn't even consider that, right? But South Florida is a team that is, in terms of Ken Palm, is their best win of the season. So that's why it's really tough for me to take a team like Georgia seriously. But then again, when I look at Vanderbilt's got 5 wins inside the top 50. Yeah, I can handle 5 wins inside the top 50 because again, when you look at who you're going to be facing in conference, currently the SEC inside the top 50. Kentucky is 18th, Vanderbilt is 7th, Tennessee's 15th, Florida's 11th, Auburn's 39th, Arkansas's 27th, LSU's 35th. Everybody else is outside the top 50, right? So there's plenty of wins in conference without, what I'm saying? You don't even have to win a ton of games inside the top 50 and still win a lot of games in conference. And that's where a team like Georgia scares me. Like Georgia's only win right now, when you're looking at a KenPom ranking, the only teams that they're probably projected to beat, in my mind, is like a South Carolina or a Mississippi State. Those two teams are more fringe 100 KenPom teams. They're
Mhm.
currently like 88th and 90th. Like those are teams that Georgia should be expected to beat, but I would not expect them to beat some of these other teams. And so that's why I personally can't take as much stock into like what the net or Evan Maya currently has, because they're rewarding the fact that Georgia has not lost but one time this season, right? My
Mhm.
concern is they also have not played anyone, right? Like it's like a Mississippi State schedule that you've seen Chris Dan's schedule. And this season, Mississippi State has been pretty poor because they have lost some of those games and they have played a tougher schedule. But over the past few years, you saw Buzz Williams do it when he was at A&M. You saw Chris Jans do it. Some of these teams have scheduled really, really poorly, and it just hurts you long term because you're not prepared for conference play, right? The first time you're going to face real adversity, as Nate Oates talks about, is in the SEC, and you don't have anything to draw back on. So that's really my concern when I look at it. I think that Vanderbilt's an absolutely legit team. I think that Florida is a legit team. I do think that there's some struggles with like Xavier Lee and his transfer coming over. And then Arkansas, I think, is also a legit team. I think that they're getting a lot of success out of the freshmen. So I think that that is something that's been really, really successful for them. And I do think there are other good teams in the league, but I think that the difference in the league this year is just the bottom is not nearly as good. And part of that's based on scheduling. Part of that's based on, just worse players. Part of that's based on not having as many, 5-year guys. So some of these things just kind of have to be expected.
Yeah, I feel like some of these things are kind of not necessarily evening out, but I think a few things are. So we'll move in from what the ratings are telling us to what me and Owen tell you, which may be more reliable than what KenPom is. I'm just kidding, of course. I like KenPom. So based on non-conference play, me and Owen made our list of who has impressed us the most. Now, non-conference play, Alabama does still have one more game against Yale. Yale, who is, I think, 11-1, and will have not played a game in like 19 days or something insane before they play Alabama. But we both have the same top two, Alabama and Vanderbilt. I'll discuss that in a second. And then for 3 to 5, we have the same teams, just in a very different order. I have Florida at 3. Owen has Florida at 4. I have Arkansas at 4. He has Arkansas at 5. I have Tennessee at 5. He has Tennessee at 3. My For Alabama and Vanderbilt, I'm giving Alabama the benefit of doing a harder schedule. Vanderbilt has had some impressive wins and they are undefeated. They're taking care of business. I'm just giving Alabama the hat tip for just playing the tougher schedule. But do I think Vanderbilt's legit? I think they probably are. But you never know until the conference play really starts. And conference play won't, like I said, won't be as strong this year. But there's still a lot of quality teams in this conference. And then Florida, I'm giving them benefit for hard schedule. They've lost to UConn. They lost to Arizona. I believe they also had a tough game against Florida State that they were able to come back and win from. But the bad loss for Florida, I think, was probably TCU. TCU, I remember, opened the season against New Orleans and lost. And then when I saw the notification that TCU beat Florida, my eyes went very wide. But I think it's just been like an adjustment for Boogie Flan and Xavier Lee with the Florida system, because Florida has some of the best bigs in the country. Tommy Haw, we'll talk about him a little bit later. I think he's an incredible player. Condon's always reliable. Chinulu, his rebounds have soared this year. I thought he was an incredible rebounder last year, but he's only gotten better at it. And then their other guy, I always forget his name, Haglaughton, I think is what his name is.
Longden, yeah.
Hanlogden, yeah. He's also an incredible player too. They got the bigs for it. They got the bigs to push in conference play. And then I'm going to give Arkansas a big shout out here. They've also scheduled pretty hard. Michigan State. They've also played Duke, Texas Tech, Louisville. They've also played Houston. The 3 games they lost were Michigan State, Duke, Houston. All 3 pretty good defensive teams. I think that's the biggest thing that has pushed Arkansas, though, is in those games, the defensive length of those 3 teams really pushed them and really just kind of confused them. But yeah, I'm going to give them credit for scheduling the games, and they've also had some good wins. Like Texas Tech just beat Duke and then beating Louisville. I'm going to give them credit there. And then Tennessee, I think Tennessee's a solid team. Gillespie, I think, can be a really outstanding player when he wants to be. And then we'll see about Tennessee. I think Tennessee, of any team in this list, is kind of like a very hit or miss. I have confidence in them, but if things go off the rails, I feel like that could be that they could, shoot down. But I have confidence that they're going to be a team that competes for the top of the SEC. How about you, Owen?
Yeah, and had I thought about it, I may have actually Arkansas is one that I think my problem is my preconceived notion of Arkansas. I wasn't quite as high on them in the preseason. And so I think that, if I had to redo it, I may have actually thrown Arkansas above Tennessee and Florida. I may have had like Arkansas, Tennessee, then Florida. Alabama, I'm giving them the credit of, Alabama's three losses are to current Ken Palm number two, number four, and number five. Alabama has obviously had issues in rebounding, but they've had issues in rebounding as three of the better rebounding teams in the entire country. Do I think a game like against Florida is going to be difficult for Alabama? Absolutely. I think that Alabama's going to have to show things. However, I think when you're looking at this from a non-conference slate, I'm with you. Alabama having a win over St. John's, having a win over Illinois, having a win over Clemson, all three of those wins are technically better than any win that Vandy has. So for me, I'm just giving the bump based on schedule. I've not seen Vandy against the top of the country. So, I'm going to give the bump to Alabama just because not only have they scheduled the top of the top, they have some wins over the top of the top. Vandy, great team, definitely deserves to be second, in my opinion. Like I said, I probably would have actually had Arkansas third. Now, looking back at it now, that was an oversight on my part. The reason I say that is I'm looking at Arkansas, and Arkansas has a very strange schedule where they have a bunch of bye games. And instead of having where Alabama, what I think Alabama is successful is instead of having a team that's 300th in the country, they schedule a team like Kennesaw State that's still, like 160. Like Alabama generally does not schedule teams that are truly just have no shot at making the tournament. And I think that really helps Alabama because you're still scheduling reasonably good teams, right? You're playing a South Florida team that is still, again, very good. What I think that Arkansas that kind of shocks me is Arkansas, like you said, their three losses are to Houston number 9, Duke number 6, and Michigan State number 13. But they do have a win over Louisville at 14. They do have a win over a good Texas Tech team at 24. So I actually probably would give them a little bit of the bump. The reason I have Tennessee over is the win over Houston. To me, that win over Houston to me is a really big deal. I also am docking Florida just a little bit because I think that the Boogie Fland and Xavier Lee experiment, when you're talking about the non-conference play, I have to dock you based on what we thought that they were going to be and what they are capable of. Because Xavier Lee and Boogie Fland have not been near the shooters or near the impactful guys that you thought they would be coming into this season. They have four losses. Like you said, the big one was against TCU. That's the one that kind of is the head scratcher. That's a 57th in Ken Palm currently. Currently, Boogie Fland is shooting 23% from three, and Xavier Lee is at 25% from three. That's really
Mm-hmm.
just a massive step down from what you had last season and Walter Clayton and all the guards, Will Richard and all the guards that you had last season. And to me, that's the big thing. They don't have a current 3-point shooter shooting better than 35% from three that has taken more than two attempts. Their best 3-point shooter is Urban Klabzar, and he's at 34.5 or point 0.9. The problem that I have with that is I look at Florida very similarly to how I look at a team like Alabama in what they like to do. They're a very analytically driven team. He just does it through the bigs instead of through the guards. The
Mm-hmm.
problem that I have with that is where Alabama thought that they would be trading 2 for 3s against Arizona because Arizona doesn't take a lot of threes. Difference is Arizona is still a good shooting team when they take the threes, right? They don't take a lot, but when they take them, they are successful at making them. The problem that Florida runs into is Florida currently is 336th in the entire country and the worst Power 5 team at shooting the 3-point ball. They're 28% as a team. Um, to me, that's just not going to be enough. Is Tommy Houck and Chinyalu and all the guys we talked about, are they going to be able to help you beat up on some people that just don't have good enough front courts? Yes, they are, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the best front court in the SEC. It still is. We knew it would be, and that's still going to help you win a lot of games. But to me, I have to dock you fairly substantially because of how poorly you've shot as a team. And I just haven't seen anything that leads me to believe that that's going to change because I think at this point, not to say that a 12 game sample size is perfect, but a 12 game sample size is, a third of the season. And, if through a third of the season you're shooting 28%, I have to take that as some level of confidence in what you're going to do moving forward.
Yeah, kind of like a this may be just who you are type of deal. So we'll go
Correct.
into Alabama's schedule. SEC schedule. We'll go first six, middle six, last six. We'll start with the first six. I remember growing up being an Alabama fan. I always loved starting with Kentucky. That'd be sarcasm, of course, because Kentucky would be, so good. Alabama would be so mediocre, and then we'd get to play Kentucky first and really just set the tone for SEC play. But this first six is interesting. I think it's interesting to start with Kentucky and Vanderbilt. Kentucky being how they've kind of started out. They started out very poorly, but they got Jalen Lowe back. Jaden Quaintance got to play against St. John's, and he looked all about what is advertised. Vanderbilt being the team that we just talked about are they actually who they say they are? And then we have Texas, who's been pretty okay. Mississippi State has been one of the worst SEC teams. Oklahoma, where Darion Reed has looked okay. And Norman has always, don't know why, it's just been a place where Nate Oates goes. Alabama, I don't think, has won at Oklahoma since Nate Oates has been there. And then Tennessee at home. What do you think about this first stretch of games? And like, which game is like the most important one to set the tone? I would say probably Vanderbilt maybe, but I don't know.
To me, it's the first game. The Kentucky game sets the tone. And I think the big answer, you said it, they got Jaden Quaintance back. And to me, if they don't have Jaden Quaintance, I think that Alabama wins this game by 10 points. Because honestly, I'm not a super big fan of the roster that Kentucky has put together. Obviously, they have had issues with Jalen Lowe, as you mentioned. They've had some issues, but I have not been a super huge fan of what Kentucky has put on the floor so far this season. But I do think that they're a decent team. Adding Jaden Quaintance back, to me, shows that Alabama is going to have to be physical in the interior. St. John's was kind of dominating the post. And then when they put him in that game, they immediately went on a crazy run. They dominate the rest of the game and really put St. John's away. I thought that what Kentucky is able to have when they have a guy like Quaintance, I think that that's a big deal. Also, I think defending your home court in the SEC is super, super important. So for me, that Kentucky game has to be one of the most important. I agree that Vandy in general is a good one, but I think that if you drop the at Vandy game, that game's not going to hurt you. So for me, that doesn't really impact me. But I think that if you were going to lose one game, I think the Vandy game is the one to lose. Obviously, on the road, going to be probably a top 10, top 15 type matchup. I'm not too concerned about that one. And then for me, the final one is if you can pick up a win against Tennessee at home. Obviously, you've not beaten Rick Barnes, I believe, since you had Brandon Miller. Alabama has struggled against Rick Barnes and his teams. That's going to test your physicality. It's going to test what you have available. But getting that game at home, I think that it's a game you have to win. And I think that that is a very, very big deal. You only play Tennessee once. The fact that you get it at home has to make you very happy. Like I said, for me, I would love if you come out of you tell me, hey, you're coming out of this thing 5-1 through the first six, and your one loss is at Vandy by like 3 points, I would take it in a heartbeat, right? I would be completely okay with that because I do think that Kentucky game changed when they got Quaintance back. And then that Tennessee game is always going to scare me, even though it's at home, just because obviously Rick Barnes has coached very, very well against Nate Oates. Now, I think that you have a better backcourt setup to be able to beat Tennessee this season as compared to what you've had in seasons past. But I still think that Tennessee, has seemed to have your number for quite a bit. I agree with you in the Oklahoma, Norman thing. I was at the game that we got the court stormed on us with Brandon Miller. Brandon Miller's team was dominant, was the best team in the country that year. And Oklahoma, beat us by almost 30. It was a crazy, crazy game. For some reason, we have struggled in Norman. But to me, what Oklahoma has put on the floor. If Alabama can't rebound, Oklahoma is allergic to it, right? Like Oklahoma
Mm-hmm.
had an inability to rebound for long stretches from what I have seen. They're playing Muhammad Wagi major minutes, and if you've been on this channel or mine or any others, he's not a terrible center, but he can't be your starting center. And then Darion Reed just has not turned into the guy that I think you thought he was going to be as a recruit. It's part of the reason why he's on Oklahoma's roster and not still on Alabama's. There's other reasons for that, but either way, the point being, I don't think Oklahoma is going to give you quite the scare. Are they a good team? Yes, but I think that you can take care of them. Like I said, to me, if you get out of this 5-1 with your one loss being to Vanderbilt, I'm super happy. I think reasonably you could win all six. And if you win all six, then in my mind, you win all six. I think that 16-2 is very much in play.
Yeah, if everyone can start off winning all six of these, yeah, absolutely. The potential is to the sky. I think 5-1 is probably what I would obviously best case scenario 6-0. I think I'm just gonna give the SEC road environments credit. They are difficult to win at sometimes, whether it be at Oklahoma or at Vanderbilt. So that's what I'm seeing right now. I don't know, just the rebounding and defensive efforts, which like you said, it's against the best competition. So I could just be overreacting. We'll go into the second set of six, and this includes the game that scares me the most, and it's at Florida. I think that one is like the one that gets me the most, with the rebounding issues that Alabama has. Playing against those bigs does scare me because they start two bigs. They're going to start, well, I mean, though they start Haw, they'll start Condon, and they'll start Chinulu, and then Alabama's going to have to throw, big bodies. Like Sherrill obviously is going to start. I feel like that's a game Bo Bowen probably may have to start, and then also Amari Allen probably at the 3, or maybe Houston at the 3, whoever's going to be more physical with Haw. But I don't hate this group of 6. Ole Miss hasn't been entirely great this year. South Carolina hasn't been great. Missouri's in the middle of the pack. A&M with new coach Bucky McMillan from Sanford, formerly from Mountain Brook. He's initiating a lot of the same systems that Nate Oates does, where they just play really fast, play at a high tempo. But I don't hate this group of 6. I think the Florida game is by far the hardest one in this. And then also Auburn. Auburn's 8-4. They've kind of scheduled like Alabama has, but I don't know. I feel like when I watch Auburn play and I watch Alabama play, I think Alabama looks to be the better team, but it also being at Auburn, that place is just cursed. I know we won on a buzzer beater last year, but I could definitely see a 4-2 in this stretch as a 4-2 stretch, just because it's at Auburn, and Auburn, that place is cursed. And when things don't go your way, Tahad Pettiford has his best game of the year. He usually plays a lot better on the road, but I could see him having a high-quality game, Auburn getting the free throws. They've been shooting a lot of free throws this year in the home court. The home advantage could play at their advantage. But what do you think about these middle 6? And, how do you think Alabama does?
Yeah. In my mind, this is one where, again, if you told me on that first 6, you told me, hey, you're going to go 5-1, I wouldn't be thrilled, but I would be okay with it, right? I would love to win all 6 of those. I think you're capable of winning all 6. I think that worst case scenario, you have to go 4-2 or better. For this one, if you gave me 5-1 right now, I would take it. You tell me we're splitting Florida and Auburn, I would take it in a heartbeat, right? Because you're winning at a really tough place to play in one of them, right? You're going to win in a really tough arena at Auburn, or you're going to beat a Florida team that has had your number that Nate Oates has not been able to crack since he's been at Alabama, right? A Florida team that is very, very successful. Do I think that it's possible you could win both? Sure, right? And the reason why I keep coming back to kind of the same thing is what has been able to take down Alabama, right? Auburn has a really good rebounding set. Their defense is a little worrisome, right? Alabama has, again, struggled against some of the better teams in the country. Obviously, yes, against offensive rebounding, but there's a little bit more to it than that. You still have to have a good defense. You still have to have a good offense, right? The rebounding is not enough to beat Alabama. You have to really combine that rebounding with everything. And I think that's the reason why if Alabama could win both of these games, there are chinks in the armor in both cases. Auburn's big chink in the armor is their defensive rebounding is atrocious. They are not turning people over very much. And I think that Alabama has seemed to revel in the environment of playing in that arena. Right. So I think that Alabama, at a minimum, will be ready to go in that arena. When you're looking at Florida, it just comes back to 3-point shooting. I think that the 3-point shooting for Florida scares me to a major degree. The thing that if you had to ask me on the Alabama side that potentially could scare me is like, what happens if Aiden Sherrill gets 3 fouls?
Mm,
Right? Like, if Aiden
hmm
Sherrill has 2 fouls in the first half, like Alabama probably loses the game
hmm
because you know Taylor Bowen has, in this Kennesaw State game, and I'm sure he's going to get destroyed for it, had 2 rebounds. Keaton Bristow is okay at a small ball 5, but this is not a team you can play small ball with. And I'm firmly of the mindset that Noah Williamson will either grow up or get left on the bench, and Nate Oates isn't even going to pull him, right? Like, this is a game that, like, this is kind of the team you brought in Noah Williamson for. This is a game where you kind of hoped he was going to be good enough that you could start a lineup that included Taylor Bowen at the 3.
hmm
That you were going to start a lineup against them that was Taylor Bowen at the 3, Noah at the 4, Aiden at the 5. Noah's not start. He will not start this season, right? But like, this is, Nate even mentioned some points about like, oh, maybe we could run twin towers, kind of like we ran with Cliff and with Big Cliff and with Aiden Sherrill. And because of both of them having the ability to shoot the 3, I think that was Nate's thought process behind bringing in a guy like Aiden or a guy like Noah to complement a guy like Aiden. But unfortunately, Noah has been borderline unplayable, and in some games, not even borderline. And so to me, that's part of the problem with this game. I think that if you told me for sure Aiden wasn't going to be in foul trouble, I would feel pretty good about the Florida game because I think that Aiden will have his body ready to go up against those bigs and will be ready for that. I think that Alabama can shoot well enough to beat them. But like, the problem for me being, injury possibilities, obviously we hope that everyone's healthy, but the fact that injuries happen, the fact that fouls happen, Alabama really needs everyone available from Keaton to Taylor to Amari Allen to everyone who is possibly capable needs to be available for that Florida game. I think that's where your margin for error just isn't great. And so, like I said, you give me 5-1, I would take it with these 6 games.
Yeah, yeah, 5-1. You have to take it in this 6. But yeah, the Noah Williamson transfer, like we talked about, hasn't worked out as well, which is crazy because he won the Patriot League Player of the Year, but even in these non-con games against like Kennesaw State, South Florida, he can't even get playing time. That's the thing that's crazy to me. Like, if it's one thing if like against St. John's or Arizona, he's not getting playing time, which I mean, yeah, shame. But him not getting playing time against these other teams, it's crazy. Just because, I mean, we watch the games, you realize why he's not getting playing time. And you're just like, how did he win Patriot League Player of the Year? And I'm like, in the whole conference, he was the best player. Crazy. We'll
So,
go.
I mean,
Yeah.
a great example, really quick. So, a great example, the South Florida game. The South Florida game is the type of game that when you're looking at the Patriot League is not a great league, right? Admittedly, they're
Mhm.
not a great league. However, the Patriot League, the best team in the Patriot League currently for this season is, I just want to go back. I want to say this 100% certain. So the best team in the Patriot League currently is Colgate at 174, right? So
Mhm.
part of that's some of your issue, like the competition you're going up against. But when you look at what Noah Wilson has done this season, because of how he did, like, you would assume the Kennesaw State game. Surely the Kennesaw State game is the type of game that he could do well in. Kennesaw State currently ranked in KenPom 163, so right around what the best team in the Patriot League is. And if you're Player of the Year, you should be able to play the best teams. This game, he played 4 minutes and he had 1 block. That was his whole stat line. Against South Florida, another mid-major. Again, we're not talking about the top of the SEC. We're not talking about your Arizonas of the world or your UConns of the world. Against South Florida, he played 6 minutes. He had 3 fouls. He had a turnover. He did have 2 steals to his credit, but he had 3 fouls in 6 minutes. And I was at that game. Nate was the turnover. Nate basically put his hand in his head, or his head in his hands, because he had no idea what Nate was trying to do. Nate is beyond shocked at how poor he's playing at certain times. Right. And so I
Mhm.
think that's, to me, part of the issue is, again, I think that this goes a little differently. And again, I'm not asking him to be, an elite center, best in the country center. But I think that Alabama was hoping that they were going to get a usable center. And unfortunately, the only game that he has scored more than 3 points and played more than 10 minutes was the UNLV game. He played 18 minutes. He scored 4 points. He had 4 fouls. He had 3 turnovers. He did have 6 rebounds, but he had 3 turnovers and 4 fouls in those 18 minutes.
Here are the last 6 SEC games: Arkansas, at LSU, Mississippi State, at Tennessee, at Georgia, and then Auburn. Give me 4-2, best 5-1 here. I think I'll take it. Arkansas is a good basketball team. Darius Acuff is a real deal freshman player. I think Alabama should win at LSU. They're not a bad team. Mississippi State at home should be a give me win. At Tennessee probably is one of the most difficult games on the schedule, along with at Florida. At Georgia, like we talked about earlier in the video, Georgia being like, are they, a real deal team? Well, by this time of the year, we will have that figured out. Still a hard place to play. I mean, the last few times Alabama's played there has been tough. And then ending the season with Auburn at home is I think that's the first time in a really long time that Alabama's done that. So that's actually kind of a cool thing to happen. But what do you think about these last 6? What game stands out to you, and like what record do you see us getting? Best case, worst case scenario?
Yeah. I think best case you're talking I think 5-1 you're really happy with. I think I think that realistically 4-2 you should not be upset with. Like you said, Arkansas, Tennessee, Auburn. The only reason why you would be upset with 4-2 is that's going to mean that you're going to drop at least one home game. And obviously Nate's kind of thought process is defend your home court. If Nate Oates was you were to ask him like, hey, what would you like to be able to do? Obviously 18 no, but like realistically, like what are you trying to do? I think that if you were to ask him, give me 3 games you would be okay with dropping, it would be like at Tennessee, at Vandy, at Florida, right? Give me those 3 losses, finishes 15-3. I think, Nate would be pretty happy. Because at the end of the day, in the SEC, you have to be able to defend your home court. And I know that obviously Alabama lost a game in Coleman Coliseum against a great Purdue team, but defending your home court is something you have to be able to do if you want to compete at the top of the conference, compete at the top of the country. So I think that realistically, like I said, for me, I would love to see 5-1. I think that 4-2, you wouldn't be super upset. The only part you would be upset about is that means you're dropping a game at home. And like I said, Nate does not want to drop a game at home. And because I just realistically don't think you're losing at LSU or at Georgia. The reason I say that, right? Like I think if you're dropping 2 of these games, it's 2 of Auburn, Arkansas, and Tennessee, and that would mean you're losing to either Auburn or Arkansas at home, and obviously that would be the last thing that you want to try to do.
Yeah, it's crazy how Alabama ended the season last year. I think the last 3 games were at Tennessee, who ended up being a 2 seed. Florida at home. Florida ended up being the 1 seed national champion, and then the last game of the regular season was at Auburn, who was another 1 seed. So crazy schedule the SEC had last year at this time. We'll give our prediction on who we think the top 4 seeds will be. These are not meant to be in order. It's just things who are the 4 teams that will be in the top 4 lines that get the double buys in the SEC tournament. Ours are pretty similar. It's that there's one difference. I have Arkansas and Owen has Kentucky. So what I'm getting at, Owen, is you think Kentucky is going to turn this thing around. Jaden Quaintus is going to be the real deal, and you think they're going to go on a run. Is that what I'm getting from this?
Yeah, I also think that what's going to happen is it's going to be, I think that 4th spot is going to be one that, so first off, I don't fully trust in Calipari in SEC play. I know that Calipari has had a history of being very, very good. Obviously, a lot of Kentucky teams, and he did very well. But to me, it's still tough for me to fully trust what Cal is going to do at Arkansas. So for me, that's the reason why they dropped out. His regular season has not been great. It's the reason why he's no longer at Kentucky. So for me, that is some worrisome. The reason I have Kentucky is I think that what's going to happen is you're going to have like a bunch of teams at 12-6. And I think the Kentucky may get like a tiebreaker or something. I picked out of, in my mind, I think Arkansas, Kentucky, Vandy are all going to be in that tier of, could be 4th in the SEC or could be 7th in the SEC type numbers. I think that Alabama, Florida, Tennessee are probably the 3 teams that are, competing for the 1, 2, 3. And I think that 4 spot's a little more open. But for me, I think that Jaden Quaintance is a big deal. And I think that what he will provide is he will provide something that very few teams in the SEC have. And it's the reason why I think Alabama is just about a lock to be a top four. Is I think that what Alabama has struggled with this season that we've seen is dominant post play. And the SEC, outside of a team like Florida, does not have a ton of super dominant posts. You have a guy in Keyshawn Hall at Auburn, and we'll talk about him shortly, that like is a very, very good player. You got Thomas Houck and stuff at Florida. You've got some, you got guys at Tennessee. You have some dominant bigs, but the bottom half to middle half of the SEC does not have super dominant bigs. And I think that getting a guy like Quaintance and compare that with, I think that Kentucky will figure out some of the shooting. I think you compare those two together. I think that that will actually get Kentucky able to win some games. Like I said, I'm not having them top four as like a 14-4 type top four, but I do think that they could go 12-6 and win a tiebreaker. Maybe scare 13-5 if they can figure out some of the front court issues.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. With I think the middle of the pack is going to be so close. I think Alabama is going to be closer to the middle of the pack than to the top of the SEC. I think Alabama's looking, in my opinion, around 13-5 in the SEC. That would be probably where I'm predicting it. I just think the main thing without the problem with Alabama, besides the rebounding, I think when the offense goes stale, it goes very, very stale. And against some of these teams, that's just not going to cut it. But that is something that can be figured out, like better lineups, better shooting lineups, and also Latrell Wrightsville getting back to his A game. He hasn't had his A game at all this year, maybe besides the St. John's game. But we know what he's capable of. But speaking of players, we also will give you our last thing here is our player of the year projections. We both are incredibly biased. No, I'm just kidding. But we both think that LeBaron Philon has the best chance of being the SEC Player of the Year, and I mean, rightfully so. If you watched the games, you've seen how incredible he is. We both also have Tommy Haw as the second best. He's Florida's 3, and he's incredible. He's taken really the next jump. Like he was incredible in their I think it was the Elite Eight game last year against Texas Tech, where he hit 3 big threes at the final 5 minutes to go ahead and send him to the Final Four. But he's taken an incredible jump since Walter Clayton has left. And then I'm going to go with my third man, Darius Acuff Jr. from Arkansas. He's a freshman. He's averaging 18 points per game. He's been an incredible get and find by Calipari. He's elevated their game. I think if I had a fourth guy, I probably would have Jacoby Gillespie and then probably Keyshawn Hall rounding that out as well, who you have at the third spot. What do you think about the 3 players that you have that separates them from the rest of the pack?
Yeah, LeBaron Philon, in my mind, usually when you look at who the player of the year often is in the SEC, it's the best player on one of the top 4 teams. And if I have Alabama as a top 4 team, the guy who's averaging 22 points a game has to be in that ranking, right? So that's the easy one for LeBaron Philon. I think that how he has run the offense and how he's able to, control getting to where he needs to be. I think that Nate Oates getting on to him for his defense and stuff. I think that LeBaron thrives in the big moments. And I think that, even for as poor as Alabama played at times in the Arizona game, and I know LeBaron had some turnovers, LeBaron actually was a fairly bright spot in that game. He had a pretty good game outside of the turnovers. He really shines in those massive moments. And I think in SEC play, that's the kind of thing that he's going for. I expect him to have some major plays. The thing that I point out to people is obviously the Mark Sears buzzer beater over Auburn is what's going to get talked about. Nobody's going to talk about the fact that LeBaron Philon had a steal and a runaway dunk that set up the Mark Sears buzzer beater to win the game, right? Like LeBaron Philon literally had a steal a minute before that sets up the win of the game. So I think that's kind of the thing that I would look at. The other thing that I would look at is when you're looking at Tommy Houck, I 100% agree. I thought that he was elite last season in the Elite Eight and in some of those other games. He was dominant against Alabama, double figures in both. I thought that he was the glue guy for Florida last season, and I think that they need him to be a little bit more of the glue guy even this season. I really like what he's doing for them. I'm really impressed. And then Keyshawn Hall, I think, is kind of a sleeper. I'm not super high on Auburn this season, but I do think that Keyshawn Hall is a very, very good player. And I think that Keyshawn Hall is going to be, again, I'm giving a little bit of an emphasis on somebody who I think is probably one of the better bigs in the SEC, or post presence in the SEC. And I think that a guy like Keyshawn Hall is going to be able to dominate some teams like Mississippi State and Oklahoma, and he's going to be able to run up some SEC stats. And I think that, again, those are sometimes things that voters unfortunately talk about is like, oh yeah, this guy dominated this game, and I think that he's just an elite post presence. So that's kind of where I have him. Tommy Houck, also a guy who does play in the post a little bit, a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife. But in my mind, I am prioritizing a little bit of post over an Acuff, right? I think the Acuff's elite. He would definitely be in my top five. Tyler Tanner, maybe another guy that might be in my top five for Vanderbilt, especially if they play really well. There's some guys that I think they're definitely possibilities, but I think that I am going to prioritize the post at least for now.
Yeah, I think the issue with Vanderbilt is going to be they got three really great players: Duke Miles, Tyler Tanner, and then Tyler Nickel. They all just kind of take points away from each other. Whereas I feel like with Philon, he's running away with the best player on Alabama's team. Keyshawn Hall the same way. But yeah, that is our SEC preview. We went through all the slides, crazy. But we're hoping for a good year for Alabama, hoping that Alabama can run the table, get a top 4 seed, and hopefully looking at a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament as well. I feel like the 1 seeds are kind of on lock right now with, you got Michigan, you have Arizona, you have Iowa State, you have Gonzaga, you have all those teams at the top of the list. But I think Alabama probably can compete for a low-end 2 seed at the best, probably a 3 seed. That's what we're hoping for. But Owen, you have any last thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that at the end of the day, the goal for this should be finish in the top 4 of the SEC, to get the double bye for the SEC tournament, get a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, and then let the chips fall where they may. Right? That's kind of where I would look at it. At the end of the day, the team that made the Final Four was a 4 seed, right? So it's all about like getting hot at the right time. I think that people that are underestimating Alabama because of how poor the rebounding is at times, it's a little exaggerated because of the schedule they're playing. And that's what I would just warn fans to say is like, when you turn on a game against Alabama versus Purdue or Alabama versus Arizona, and you're like, oh my gosh, this Alabama team can't rebound. Yeah, Arizona, the guy that was rebounding for Arizona is the number 1 rebounder in the entire country, right? He's top 3 in both categories. So he's going to do that to a lot of people, right? Alabama's not going to be facing that night in, night out in the SEC. There's going to be some good players, but just temper your expectations and understand that the reason why Nate schedules some of these games is to understand what he needs to work on. And in some cases, you're not going to face a team of that caliber until you get to an Elite Eight or a Final Four. That's not the kind of team you're going to be facing in a Sweet 16, even, unless you're maybe like a 4 seed or something, right? But most of the time, you're not going to be facing that caliber of team because of the way that the schedules work out, both in conference and in March Madness. So I would just warn people when you're thinking about Alabama and you're like, oh, the team's really bad for this reason, just understand how tough some of these things can be and who NATO's is scheduled, because that should impact how you think about the possibility of how good this team could be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Well, thank you guys for watching. Be sure to tune into more episodes of the Roll Tide Rewind, and also be sure to check out Barnes on Bama and check out Owen's content. He's very close to 900 subscribers. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're at like 890, 891 right now. So trying to push for 900, and then we'll see if we can get to 1,000 before the March Madness tip off. That's kind of the goal. If we can hit 1,000 before the end of basketball season.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that goal is achieved even sooner than that. Well, thank you guys for watching. Hope you all have a great Christmas week, and Roll Tide.